Welcome to the today's dialogue, where we explore complex topic in a simple and open way. Today we are taking a dive into a story of Taliban, a group that has been at the center of the headlines for decades. We'll pack their history, motivation, and the impact they had on Afghanistan and the world. Let's rewind to 1970s Afghanistan. The country was facing political turmoil with the Soviet-backed government facing resistance from the various groups. One of this group was Mujahideen, a collection of rebel fighters for a more traditional Islamic society. Among them were young students called Taliban, meaning religious students. After the Soviet withdrawal in 1989, Afghanistan descended into civil war.
In 1992, during the Afghanistan Civil War, cameraman Nigel Thompson had his closest brush with death.
All of a sudden, I felt a punch in the back and went deaf for about 2 hours. And I had actually been hit in the shoulder with a bit of shrapnel. It didn't hurt, and I knew I wasn't mortally wounded or even, well, it was not a deep thing, but it wasn't a big deal. I'm not bleeding a lot. The odds of getting killed in a trench are, 1,000 to 1. I've made a conscious decision that, on a mathematical basis, that it isn't going to happen to me, and therefore there's no problem.
Fear is a good thing. Fear is what tells you if you're too close or not. Fear is what keeps you alive.
Maria Fleet has been a combat journalist for 8 years, witnessing up close some of the world's worst conflicts.
The Taliban, with a strict interpretation of Islam and promising of orders, gained support, particularly in rural areas. By the mid 1990s, they controlled most of the country, imposing their harsh version of Islamic law. Life under the Taliban was oppressive, especially for the women and girls. Education was restricted, freedom of movement was limited, and the public punishment was brutal. Their harsh rule and support for terrorist groups like Al Qaeda led to the international isolation and eventually the US led invasion in 2001.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. It's important for Americans to know this war will not be quick, and this war will not be easy. We know this from not only intelligence, but from the history of military conflict in Afghanistan. It's been one of initial success, followed by long years of floundering and ultimate failure.
The Taliban were quickly toppled from the power, but the war in Afghanistan dragged on for 2 decades. Despite billions spent and countless lives lost, the US and its allies couldn't achieve a lasting peace. In 2021, with American troops withdrawing, the Taliban quickly regained control of the country.
Afghans are thronging to Kabul's airport, desperate to get on planes and leave the country at any cost. They're scaling the airport's walls this morning, rushing in. There's no screening, no security checks, just force of numbers. When they do manage to push aboard planes, they're so crowded, pilots won't take off. And no one agrees to disembark. It's all happening just a few hundred yards from the military side of Kabul airport, now separated by a row of barbed wire from the civilian side, in chaos. The military side is where the U.S. is staging an elaborate evacuation of American diplomats from the embassy. But even here, Afghans managed to push through, willing to cling onto an aircraft as it took off, rather than stay in Afghanistan.
The world is watching cautiously as the Taliban return to power. They have promised a more moderate approach, but human rights groups remain skeptical. Women's rights are already being curtailed, and the future of Afghanistan remains uncertain. The Taliban story is complex with no easy answers. They are often portrayed as simply villains, but understanding their rise requires looking at Afghanistan history, poverty, and internal conflicts. Their strict ideology may resonate with some Afghans who yearn for stability, with others fear a return of their oppressive rule.
It has been 2 years since the Taliban retook power in Afghanistan. Tens of thousands of people fled the country at the time, fearful that the takeover would mean a return to the harsh Islamist policies of the past. Taliban leaders have avoided making clear statements on many issues, but now, 2 years on, the world has a much clearer idea of what Afghanistan under a new Taliban regime looks like.
Scenes of jubilation on the streets of Kabul as members of the Taliban celebrate 2 years since they seized back power. Flags emblazoned with the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, the Taliban's formal name for the country, were held high across the capital as supporters gathered to honour their leaders.
Death to those who are against the Taliban. Peace in Afghanistan. Bloodshed has ended.
The flag waving continued at an event hosted by the Minister for Education. He spoke about the Taliban's education program at Islamic schools called madrasas.
One jihadi madrasa has been set up in each province of the country, and each one has the capacity to enroll thousands of Taliban. In each province, hundreds of madrasas have been built in villages.
The Taliban began cracking down on secular education when they regained power in August 2021, transforming schools across the country into strictly religious seminaries. These reforms include restricting the rights of women and girls to attend secondary schools and universities. Women's rights to learn, work, and to participate in public life continue to be eroded by the regime.
I don't feel good, and I'm not happy about this day. Right now, the Taliban are not ruling the country in the interests of the people. I don't understand why they are so negative about women.
But some women are determined not to give up, moving to roles where they still have the right to work, or studying in secret.
I never turned back, nor did I ever give up. Although there are no educational opportunities after the Taliban banned women from schools and universities, our minds can't be restricted. We can fight against them. We should not miss opportunities and give in to obstacles.
The international community faces a delicate task, engaging with the Taliban with holding them accountable for human rights abuse. Supporting humanitarian aid and education is crucial, but so is ensuring the voices of Afghan women and minorities are heard. Thanks for joining the Today Dialogue. The Taliban story is far from over, and we must continue to engage and open, respectful dialogue to understand the place in the world and find ways to support a peaceful future for Afghanistan.